Hello, everybody. We're here today with Dr. Robert Charette, and we are going to talk about managing IT risk for fun and profit. Hello, Dr. Charette. Thanks for joining us today. I want to tell everybody a little bit about our guest today. Dr. Robert Charette is an internationally acknowledged authority and pioneer in risk ecology management, systems engineering, and the management of very large-scale software-intensive systems. He's also an award-winning contributing editor to IEEE Spectrum magazine. He's the editor of the Spectrum's very popular Risk Factor blog, which I read all the time. Some of the most interesting stuff out there. You should check it out. Bob's also the co-editor of the Aftershock column for IEEE Computer magazine. He's written scores of articles on the management of business and technical risk, and he's the author of several classic books about risk. There are many people in the industry who consider Bob to be the grandfather of IT risk. I know he's a mentor to many people in the industry, including myself. His knowledge is both broad and deep, and we're very lucky to have him here today. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me today. Hope it's a great conversation.
Yes, indeed. It always is with you. So let's start with a really simple question. What do you mean? You're the first person that ever actually used this term many years ago. I mean, I don't want to say how long. Risk ecology. Very interesting use of that term. What do you mean when you talk about in your work, technology risk ecology?
Well, what I mean is that when we take a look at information technology systems or information and communication systems, what we need to worry about and need to think about are the risks that they pose, not just from a technical standpoint, which has been the traditional aspect of risk management in computing, things like cybersecurity or project failures, why do projects fail, those types of things, and think more broadly in terms of how IT systems actually interact with not only other IT systems, but with human systems. So when we talk about risk ecology, what we're really worried about are all the interconnections of the risks that occur from a technical standpoint, a organizational standpoint, a social standpoint, a political standpoint, a financial standpoint, because all these things are interconnected. And they become even more interconnected as computing itself becomes more interconnected and society as a whole becomes very dependent on these systems. So we need to worry about the risks as well as the rewards and try to understand how, like in an ecological standpoint, of how if I change one risk, how do they affect other risks and other opportunities. So it's a very broad view of looking at risk, so that we can't just view risk in a technological standpoint, which has been traditionally what we've done.
So, as we make this move towards, I would say, total interconnectedness is kind of, for lack of a better term. I mean, for those of us in the audience who are following all of these trends in terms of what they call digital transformation, the fourth industrial revolution, we've got all of these new technologies out there, whether it's the Internet of Things, they refer now to the Internet of Bodies. There's this convergence of the biological world with the non-biological world. We've got advances in, deep learning, autonomous vehicles, smart cities, virtual reality. Everything seems to be kind of moving exponentially and converging on each other. Some people have called it a world of total interconnectedness. How does that really increase this risk problem, especially from this ecological perspective? There's obviously, it's not just the fact that you've got systems of systems that are interconnected in ways that nobody understands, but you've got all these political and economic components that are tied into it as well. How do you see things? Do you see this as being dangerous, or are you opportunistic about it going forward over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, part of me, as I've told you in the past, I'm a cynical optimist. As we interconnect more and more systems, obviously the potential for failure and the consequences of failure have increased, just because the number of systems that are interconnected, even if they were all 99% reliable, you get enough in there, you're going to have a collapse. And so one of the things that also makes me worried or concerned is that we don't build systems that are very reliable. We have a whole spectrum, but if we take a look, the failure rates in computing in terms of developing systems is still hovering about 35 to 40%, depending on who you're looking at. the amount of money that is wasted annually has been computed to be about $2.8 to $3 trillion a year on poor software quality. And so if you take a look at how systems are developed, how they're maintained, or how they're not maintained, and you keep adding to these number of systems, we're talking about billions of devices in a Internet of Things universe, connecting to systems that may be 60 years old. It does give one pause to think about how this is all going to work and how we're going to keep from having Armageddon, in a sense, from a technological standpoint. Sometimes I wonder, why we haven't gotten there yet, although we've seen indications every now and then of what might happen when we have some of these major outages. But, part of me also says that, hopefully we're going to learn. We build systems better today than we did 40 years ago or 45 years ago plus when I got into the business. And so we know more. The real question, I think, Michael, is, are we going to use what we know and actually be disciplined in how we create these systems? And especially as we build these systems that are more and more powerful, if we have autonomous systems and we have autonomous, the killer robots, are those good things? There's that's a discussion. Or even if we have autonomous vehicles and they crash. Well, one argument you can say, well, if they crash less than human drivers, that's a benefit. But even in small numbers of crashes, who's responsible? Who are we going to hold responsible for an autonomous vehicle crash? Is it, the driver who should have hopped in at the last moment? Is it the software designer? Is it the supplier of the software? Is it, the OEM who you bought the vehicle from? All these questions, there's a lot of these questions that we haven't resolved as we move more toward intelligent systems. So that's the next big leap. And those intelligent systems, especially if we're looking at them as being autonomous and where we don't have control and where we don't understand how they're making decisions, that is worrisome, without a doubt.
There are two things that you mentioned that those of us who are in the traditional kind of IT industry are well familiar with, which is that there's a 35 to 40% failure rate with software projects. I mean, we all know this, that projects are notoriously go over budget, over schedule, or they fail outright. And you also mentioned that there are systems, I mean, most of the country is running on computer systems that are 50 or 60 years old. It's something that most people who are not in the field don't understand. It's all of these billions of lines of code of legacy systems. This is something that is curiously left out of all the utopianism that we hear about AI and new technologies and everything, which is the fact that why would we expect the discipline of IT and of software to somehow magically become dial tone perfect when we've been struggling with these issues for 50 or 60 years? And how are we going to address all of these legacy systems which have to interact with this modern world that we're building? Nobody talks about this. Is there, what are your particular thoughts about that?
Well, I wrote a story for Spectrum last year or the year before, I can't remember now, that looked at IT legacy systems, and we talk about it being in terms of living in the shadows, right? And technology and maintenance of technology systems has always lived in the shadow world. IT systems are interesting in that the reason we have legacy systems is kind of paradoxical. We have legacy systems because they work, and they work really well. And so you're kind of loath to get rid of them. But at the same time, they also pose increasing dangers. They're systems that when they do fail, because they have been in operation for so long, have massive consequences. And so what we have is this really kind of weird situation where the legacy systems are here and we depend on them, but at the same time, we don't pay a lot of attention to them either. One of the things that has been, again, well known in the field is that legacy systems get starved. Okay, if they work, you don't fool with them. And if you try to change them, it's actually fairly dangerous. if you're doing minor updates on a system that really may not have been well documented, well, structured, using modern approaches, or they may be based on languages that, literally only hundreds of people even know anymore. These cause, sleepless nights for a lot of people. And one of the interesting things you asked me in your question was, if we go forward, who is to say that we're not going to do the same things with these autonomous systems, right? That once we get them out there, are we going to keep them updated? Are we going to keep them, in trained? Because right now, 80% or more of all IT spend globally is on maintaining systems. And that maintenance is not actually modernizing, it's just keeping the lights going on. Okay, so as we keep building on top of this base, and when we do try to modernize, modernizations often fail. They're often have higher failure rates than the original developments, because we're trying to do more, and we're also trying to integrate them with more systems. So what we have is kind of this house of cards that, if we're not careful, if we don't really think through about what we have in terms of IT and our legacy base and how they're interacting with newer systems, we haven't had it. It sounds like Chicken Little in one sense, in that the sky is falling, it could happen any time, and it hasn't happened. But it's that classic case that everything is fine until the day it isn't. And so it's that type of problem that we have, that dependency is going to be increasingly risky. And we need to be able to figure out how we're going to mitigate this risk.
Let's take a step. Let's take it up a level from the particular to a little bit to the more general. Help us understand, just on a kind of, not in an academic sense, but like, what would you say would be the root causes of risk, to help our audience better understand? If you want to break this down as we go into this new world, what are the fundamental root causes of risk in your experience?
Well, I think that the number one that's always top on my list is incorrect assumptions. If people, and this is tied closely to kind of the bias of being optimistic. When I do risk assessments, and when I've done risk assessments, or if you just go online, you read risk assessments or project reports of project failures, you'll find in almost every single case, people making assumptions about the system, about the capability of the people, the capability of the technology, the ability to actually build systems in the time that they specify, or with the quality or at the cost. I've always said it's really easy to make a system fail. I just don't give you enough time or enough money. That's not hard, because what happens, it's really difficult to dig through and actually understand how much effort really is encompassed in building IT systems. We're all very optimistic about using, we know that, in the field, we know that cost estimating tools are only within about 75%, 25% of the time, which says that they're off a lot. And so, our cost estimating tools aren't very good. How we structure systems encourages over-optimism. There's a lot of cognitive biases that come into play. So, we can talk about root causes as really being, in one sense, maybe the second big one is that computing is too easy, right? We can build systems, we can build software, we can make code, but making it work and making it reliable and understanding all the implications that come with it is very hard work. There's also another aspect, and this comes more, again, part of the ecological aspect of programs or organizations, is that when you have a system, and it's, as it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to build these systems. And especially if you're now late or you're over budget, the pressure is to get it out there to stop the financial bleeding. So one of the things that happens is testing is traditionally cut. And so systems are put out operationally before they're ready. And then these things have massive problems, and it takes you a tremendous amount of time and effort to fix them afterwards. And so, there's lots of root causes, but I think that the number one that I would put my finger on is this lack of really checking your assumptions, really understanding all the things that that you think are going to happen versus are they really going to happen? Have you really, it's what you know versus what you should know, and that gap. How do you close that gap?
And this has been consistently true for the past 40 years. Has anything changed?
I don't think
has
that
anything changed?
Hasn't changed. I think, again, if you take a look at the failures in AI systems, and those failure rates, again, depending on the literature, have been claimed as high as 85%, which isn't unusual for a new technology, or data analytics, which, again, some folks say is as high as 85%, is that, again, we don't go through and take a look at the assumptions. You take a look at why AI systems fail, and there's certain assumptions that you make about what that system can do or what you need to make it accomplish a task. For instance, you take a look at IBM Watson. When Watson came out and won on Jeopardy, right? And everybody claimed that, well, the next thing is that it's going to solve all medical diagnostic problems, right? We just feed it all in, it's be out there, no problem, because if we can solve the chess problem, if we can win on Jeopardy, we can solve all these problems. Well, Watson isn't doing all that great right now. And so, again, if you go back, there's a lot of assumptions of what you think you can do with AI until you actually try it, and then you find out that it doesn't really work the way you think it is, because, again, you're optimistic, or another way of looking at it is maybe you're arrogant. Okay, there's a lot of arrogance in our field. There has been, and there will always be, I think.
You've piqued my interest. You said Watson isn't doing so well right now. Could you be more specific?
Well, again, the element of Watson, especially in the medical field, a lot of the contracts that were signed with IBM and with Watson have kind of been let to go, the furrow, because it really hasn't proven to be as useful as they had first anticipated. Medical diagnostics is extremely hard. Part of the problem, again, is, let's just take a look in data analytics. If you go into the field of electronic health records, where you can gather all this information, all this diagnostic information from everyone, in a usable form, what people forget is that a lot of that information is corrupted, is wrong. I would urge everyone to take a look at, if they have an electronic medical record or a health record someplace, to go and check it out, because you may find that 10 to 20% of the information that is in your medical record is completely wrong. It's pretty hard to do diagnostics if lots of data is incorrect, or there's data that's missing. And so what happens is that you find out that, it's the old computing problem of garbage in, garbage out. So unless you have clean data, valid data, and valid information to be able to really do all your learning algorithms, the things don't work quite as well as you think they're going to.
What exactly, what would you say of all the new technologies that we're reading about, that some are pie in the sky, some are under development? I know that you have some thoughts about, we've talked a little bit about quantum computing. You don't seem to be you don't sort of put too much confidence in that as basically an emergent technology. I'd like to know why, and what you feel the implications of that would be. But how is the move towards IoT and smart cities and autonomous vehicles, how does that change the risk equation in the future, in your opinion?
Well, I think what you see in IoT and smart vehicles and smart cities is that computing has shifted from being kind of islands to interconnected islands to fused islands. It's almost like the geological, where when the continents separated, we're now moving in the opposite way. The continents are all moving back together again. And what happens now is that computing is much more tied to what we call cyber physical systems, right? Where there's a control of a physical system through cyber. And we're not talking about it in like a manufacturing plant or in a power plant or something like that. We're now talking about it computing being embedded in every device that we interact with. Think of Alexa. Okay, things that we're now part of. Now Alexa goes in your car, and Alexa, you talk to a computer, which then helps drive a car, and that car might be self-driving and decide to go on Beth Pass, based on information that it's gathered from the environment. So now we have the environment and our computing systems all interacting. So we have third, fourth, fifth parties all interacting together to make decisions. And so that fundamentally changes how computing now operates, because again, that information, we're very dependent on the quality of that information that's coming and the latency of that information that's coming from all these other maybe millions of sensors. The idea in self-driving vehicles, in the next 10, 20 years is that they all communicate with one another. They give you weather data, they give you traffic data, they give you road conditions, they give you, obstacles. You want to order a pizza, they can figure out exactly when you can pick up your pizza, in the car. I'm being a little facetious, but it's now, you are now part of a larger ecosystem that is constantly in communication, constantly censoring. You're censoring it, it's censoring you. And so now you in one sense, you can't escape, the environment, because that environment now is totally wired.
I don't know anybody actually who's at your level who is not concerned about this move towards total interconnectedness. There are a lot of obviously security issues, cyber risks and whatnot that come from, especially when you get into the level of the biological world, where they're now looking at, both the kind of convergence of the biological, non-biological world, the fact that, what if people can hack into your body, like, because everything is interconnected. Once people get wired in, actually get their biology wired into things, how are we supposed to deal with these hacking risks and cyber risks in a world that is that interconnected? It just seems like such a recipe for disaster. And like I said, I don't know anybody who's at your level who is optimistic. And most of those people would say no to Alexa. They would say no to Nest. They would say no to wiring their house. So how are we supposed to kind of manage this going forward? It seems like an inexorable march towards interconnectedness.
Well, I think there is. And I'm not sure that you can totally manage these risks. That one of the problems that you have is the problem of the commons when you talk about IoT, is that you have lots and lots of different suppliers who are providing you with IoT devices with different levels of security. And one of the issues, that I wrote about a number of years ago is what happens when those suppliers go out of business. There's a very interesting story that's hit the news, and in fact, it was part of Spectrum news reporting this past week about people who had bionic eyes, the implants, and that company is going out of business. And if that software doesn't work, those people go blind. Okay, now there's hope that another company is going to buy the original company and keep it going. But what happens if, again, you have implants and the software company goes out of business, or the hardware company goes out of business? How do we deal with that? Is the government supposed to come in and force people who've had, force the companies who have implanted all these devices to stay in business? That's not going to happen. So, it's not just hacking. It's just, it's the issue of legacy, the issue of, longevity. In electric vehicles, one of the things that car makers are trying to do is ensure that you have a battery that lasts 10 years. And if that battery happens, if the technology replaces it, that they'll come in and replace it with the newest technology. Because this idea that once we get in interconnected systems, we're going to have, even worse than we have now, we're going to have systems that are new, old, some are really well secured, a lot of them have no security. And we're going to be in a world that risk ecology is going to be very, very complex. And we need ways to actually understand it, the ways to be able to understand where those risks are and how to manage it. At the same time, these systems also provide tremendous benefit. And so there is this balance between risk and reward in terms of, okay, should there be guardrails put up on some of this technology until we actually understand the risk, or do we put it out there and then figure it out afterwards? I'm of two minds. You don't want to totally keep technologies in that are beneficial, but at the same time, I think that we don't understand the downsides until we put them out there and then we see them. Okay, we can talk about the internet and back in 1996 about the how it was going to free everyone. It was going to make everybody equal, and it was going to make everybody give freedom to everyone. And no, there was everyone's going to have a voice. Well, we have that, but I'm not quite sure that was quite the vision in 1996 that was being articulated.
Well, I mean, we were talking before the session started about what my hypothesis that a lot of the turmoil that we're seeing in the larger ecology, both the political and the economic spheres right now, was specifically because of the internet, because of Web 2.0, the decentralization of information that was a result of Web 2.0. Now they talk about Web 3.0, which I'm wondering if you have any particular thoughts about that, the underlying technology, how that affects the overall risk ecology, and just any thoughts about that in general.
I just think, again, it's the march toward, again, fusion, right? This idea that everything is interconnected with everything else. Now, the issue that you have is that if you have a good architecture and a good design, then from the beginning, and you understand that you have these potential risks, you can minimize the impacts. But we have found that over time, there isn't anyone that really has the power to create that architecture and to enforce it, right? These things, just like what's happened with the internet, it grows, it becomes organic. It's not something that anybody really controls. And so what happens, and again, what we've seen now in the last 10, 15 years is how governments have been able to move and shut the internet down in their countries, right? And do censorship. We don't need to mention countries, but there's a number of countries who actively censor what is said and have changed laws so that if you say certain things on the internet or through Twitter or social media, that you can be arrested. Okay, where 20 years ago, before the net really took off, those things didn't exist because those things just didn't happen, right? Not in the scale that's occurred. And I think that's one of the things is that we're now at scales that it's very hard for not only any person, but any group of people to fully understand all the things that have to happen and are going to happen to either make something successful or understand all the different uses. There's a historian, trying to remember his name off the top of my head. It's Melvin Krasberg. He said that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And so, we use technologies in ways that are way beyond what the original designers thought they were going to be used for. And a lot of times they're used in ways that are not particularly beneficial. And so I'm not sure that I've answered your question about 3.0. I just think it's going to be more of the same, but on steroids.
Well, maybe I should rephrase the question. I mean, what are your thoughts about, do you have any thoughts about the blockchain and the risks of blockchain? I know that that's a big question because there's private blockchains and companies are creating their own blockchains, but in general, as a tool, as a technology, what are your concerns about it?
Well, I think, again, the issue of blockchain, I'm not a big blockchain fan. I'm not sure that there's tremendous there's lots of claims of benefits for blockchain, but I'm a little bit skeptical of how much of these things are actually going to be very useful in the future that you couldn't do other ways that are faster, cheaper, and as good. I think the issue with blockchain is that it again now gives another set of control. Remember, when you do a blockchain, you have certain rules that are being imposed and how information is captured and how it's passed and how it's vetted. And so if we put more and more things into blockchain, and we now, whoever controls the vetting controls the blockchain and controls what information is in and what information is out. And so if you are, it's like anybody, if you control the standard, you control the technology. And so I worry about, are these vetting procedures, are the things that you can capture and what you can't capture in blockchains, are those actually transparent? Can everybody see what those rules are and understand how information is being captured, how it's being decimated, what's being decimated? Again, we're not, the issue that we have, I think, again, in all of this technology that we have, no matter how, I read about this every day. This is part of my everyday job is to read dozens of newspapers and journals every day trying to keep up on this, is that it's really hard to understand what's going on. There is so much going on in so many different areas that, again, I can't say for certain that this is particularly good or this particularly bad at any one particular point in time, because there's something else that's probably hiding in the background that's just sitting out there being developed, and we don't know what's going on. It is a very it's a much different field than when I first got in. When I first got in, after as an undergrad, I went to work for the Navy Department at the Naval Underwater Systems Center, as it was called back then. And I probably knew most of the computing people in the Navy research laboratories. You couldn't do that now. There's the growth of people in the field has been tremendous. And so even in my field of risk management, I don't know all the people who are in it like I used to. It's just because it's exploded. And so again, all these technologies, I think the thing, Michael, that people need to understand is that it takes a tremendous amount of effort to follow all these things. And the second thing is be damn skeptical of all the things that are being claimed for these new technologies and how well they're going to work and how benign they're going to be and how they're going to help everybody out. I'm highly skeptical because the 75 years of history of computing has shown that hasn't been the big worry. I wrote a paper about this on the 75th anniversary of computing, about computing ethics, and how for the last 75 years we've been worried about the technology, but what has been called the know-how, right? How things interconnect, how we get things to work, not about the know-where, which is what are we actually doing with these systems? What do we want them to do? How do we prevent them from hurting people? We have systems that have been built. There's a scandal right now in the UK on what's called the Horizon Post Office scandal. Okay, this is the UK Post Office put in an accounting system back in 1999 in the post office to help postmasters, all the local postmasters. Well, there was a flaw in the software. That flaw was known by the post office and known by the supplier. But they said instead that when there was outages, when there was shortfalls in postmaster accounts, that it was the postmasters who were fraudulently cheating the post office. So 750 plus postmasters over 14 years were criminally convicted for theft based on a software flaw that was known by post office, and they refused to admit that there was a problem. It's now only come out in the last few years, and now the government is finally paying restitution to these people. But how do you tell somebody who has been thrown in prison that sorry, our fault, and we knew about it. Okay, that's what I would call pure administrative evil. Systems being used to harm people on purpose. The same thing happened in Michigan with their unemployment system, where they went out and convicted and said, to 34,000 people that you were involved in unemployment fraud. They froze their accounts. They threw some in jail. Some people committed suicide. These are things, when people say that this system works, it's great, there's nothing wrong with it. We have 75 years of data that says don't trust it.
Yeah, there is a lot of utopianism out there. And Bob, to be perfectly frank, that's why I invited you to join us for this podcast, because I know that I like
you're passionate about this.
You're the black pill.
Yeah.
You're the refreshing black pill to the over-optimistic utopianism of all this technology, because nobody talks. You don't get very popular talking about the risk side of all these new technologies. And we've talked about it. We've covered a lot of territory so far. We talked a little bit about IoT. We talked a little bit about autonomous vehicles, about the blockchain. Do you have any particular thoughts about the risks of machine learning or of deep learning in particular going forward? Lots of pie in the sky about that. One thing that I've learned in recent time is to differentiate between these two, is that with machine learning you've got sort of mathematical or statistical models that are created that run on top of the data, that are probabilistic in nature and predictive in nature, whereas with deep learning you've got neural networks. And that one of the interesting side effects of these neural networks is that the experts don't really know what's going on inside those layers. They don't really have an understanding, which is the reason why when we hear about the stories of Google's DeepMind computer, when it famously beat the world champion of Go in 2016, that the experts had no idea how it had won. They had no way of grasping its strategy. It was almost superhuman because of the black box, the effective black box that is created by these neural networks. What are there any? Do you think a lot about the risks of deep learning and going forward, in particular that lack of understanding and visibility?
Yeah, that's an issue. It's not my field of expertise, to be honest, but it's something that I'm concerned about. I'm more concerned about how humans interact with systems like those. Okay, it's been well documented that bureaucracies, organizations believe the output of their computers more than they should. Okay, even when they're wrong, even when they've been shown to be wrong. Okay, the Horizon Post Office case, the Midas case, Centrelink in Australia. There's dozens of others. There's mats of mass destruction, right? Weapons of mass.
Is the Midas case the unemployment case in Michigan?
Yeah, that's in Michigan, and then Centrelink is down in Australia, where they had something very similar that went on to.
What could you be specific? What happened in Australia?
Well, they claim that people were not entitled to benefits and that they were cheating on their benefits, and it turned out that in fact, the algorithms were poorly constructed, had what they were supposed to do was look at periods. For instance, if you were on unemployment for a short period of time, it would average out for the whole year. So it'd say, well, you were obviously making too much money, okay, and that you owe us all this money because you were over a different time frame than what you really were, when in fact it was the algorithm that was wrong, not the people applying for benefit. And so again, it accused, I think hundreds of thousands of people in Australia of abuse, of financial welfare abuse, when it wasn't true at all. And again, these systems were put in place to save the government money, to try to eliminate fraud. And in so doing, they caused, accused more people of fraud than ever before. So, but I think, again, if you take a look at even a recent study last year in University of Georgia, I believe, that said people trust the outputs of algorithms more than they trust other people's judgments, especially in challenging situations. And so as we embed more and more AI and machine learn, whatever smart systems and approaches you're using, how do you challenge those, right? Especially if the bias is to say you're wrong. Okay, that is the worry I have.
Well,
okay?
I think there are serious political implications and social implications to that. If you have a society that doesn't allow you to question, I mean, it's similar. The analog is, we're all familiar with the phrase, listen to the science, or et cetera. Well, it's like listen to the AI. It's the same thing. If the AI is, generally we can, describe it as being a superior intelligence with superior analytical abilities and the ability to draw more correct conclusions than the humans, then that's going to affect the world of the wider world of the culture and the politics of our society, because people will be deferring to the AI, whether the AI can make mistakes. They will make mistakes, and you're right. That's
how do you challenge that right now? It's hard enough. If the Social Security Administration thinks that you're dead, right, when you're not, it is hellish to show that you actually are alive, right? And that's today. That's without any AI. That's just you get the ultimate cancel culture is being told that you're dead by your state and tell the Social Security Administration that you're dead. These are things that this is the one. If you wanted to have a, I hate to say a government agency, but there needs to be some group that's responsible for investigating computing errors in government systems, especially because government systems really count more than private systems. Okay, the government systems affect everything that you do. And they have much more impact than, if I don't like a reservation system on an airline, I can go to another airline, hopefully, if there's one nearby. But if, the IRS or the state tax authority or the DMV or somebody else says that you've done something wrong when you haven't, it is really, really difficult to get that straightened out. And, we have cases continually of people being thrown in prison for too long or incorrectly because of a computer error. Okay, and basically it takes you have to hire a lawyer, you have to go through all this expense, and then the government says, well, sorry, but all that cost is yours. Like going back to the Midas case, it's still up at the Supreme Court in Michigan to see whether or not those people who lost their homes, who had were penalized, had wages garnished, will actually be able to get full recompense, because the state government of Michigan is fighting as hard as they can and saying, well, we're not responsible for errors we make. Okay. Now, if we have computer systems that are even more integrated, that cause greater harm, and especially if they're government computing systems, this is totally, in my mind, it's totally unacceptable. We need a national as well as statewide capability to go to people to look and say, you know what? Yeah, you guys screwed up. And also too, because you screwed up, you got to pay them, for their trouble. This is going to get worse before it gets better. And right now, I don't see, there's no one in Congress, no one in the House, there's no one in the planet that I know of, right, who has no government, in the world has set up any organization to say, yeah, tell us when we screw up, we'll try to go fix it, right? It's up to the individual to fix government errors. It's bad enough with corporations, when they send, false information to credit bureaus and they harass you. That's almost as bad as being told you're dead by the IRS or the Social Security Administration. As you get corrupted data into a debt collector's database. At least there's some laws that allow you to go and try to fix that. But for government systems, nah, you're on your own.
Yes, all of this is essentially the plot of Terry Gilliam's Brazil. I just didn't think that was. I didn't think that was going to be a movie that was predictive. When I saw it growing up, I thought it was science fiction. Unfortunately, it sounds like it's become true in a lot of ways. But again, that's why I had you on the podcast, Bob, because you're a straight shooter. You tell it like it is, but the subject for today's talk is managing IT risk for both fun and profit. So maybe we could shift gears and you could talk a little bit, put on your Utopian hat and talk a little bit about your view of how computing can be used as a fantastic tool to benefit humanity, as opposed to something that is inherently dangerous because of these risks. Maybe you'd like to just shift gears and just cheer our audience up a little bit.
Yeah, I think part of the thing is to understand the power of computing, because the power of computing is paradoxical. It can be used for fantastic benefits as well as for pretty, I hate to say the word evil, but things that are not particularly pleasant. And so we need to go back a little bit, to think about why are we in the state we're in? And part of it is that computing, more than any other technology, has transformed how we've managed risk. Okay, Peter Bernstein wrote in his book, Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk, that the boundary between modern society and the past was the mastery of risk. Right? We didn't blame the gods for our problems. Right? We understood that it was what we did, the actions we took, the decisions that we made, that made that difference. So we could start to understand that we were more in control than just being, letting fate, take over, and we were, bound by whatever, the gods decided for us. So, one of the things that is interesting to me was that, and I think John Bernstein, who I don't think is related to Peter Bernstein, he's a historian, wrote in his book, Progress in the Quest for Meaning, that what, after all, is technology other than the management of risk? Okay, technology, if we think about technology, let's go back to the earliest forms of technology, like the stone axe, right? There's a great book by James Burke, which called the Axe Maker's Gift, which talks about how the axe, right? If you think about an axe, what is so important about the axe? Well, the axe not only gave you this capability to cut things, right, and to be able to shape things, but that it captured knowledge, it captured decisions, right? When you make an axe and you have to make a blade, you have to, use a flint, and you create that axe, right? What you've done is you've consciously created a human artifact. And one of the interesting things is, if you think about it, everything that is a human artifact is a set of decisions, right? The time wearing, somebody had to make the colors, somebody had to do something like this, right? Somebody had to look at the weave, all these things, everything that you see, everything that's in your apartment or your house, Michael, is a result of decisions. I have my cup, my bird cup here with water. How many decisions were made to make this size cup? How do I make the process? All those things are a result of decisions, right, that we've captured. And we capture that information in other artifacts, right? We capture it. It's really interesting. We've captured it in tools, we've captured it in other elements, but now once written language came and we had books and we had printing press, we've captured it and we're able to pass that knowledge on so we can continue to build on that, right? So if we think about it, all human artifacts are really, instantiations of a set of decisions. And those are millions and billions of decisions over time, that has created modern society. So what's interesting now, and this is something that Herb Simon, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist and ACM Turing Award winner, he said that, energy and information are the two basic currencies of organic and societal systems. A new technology alters the term of which one or the other of these is available to a system, can work on it, makes the most profound changes. Okay, so information, right, and energy. So now what we have is, you take a look at the Industrial Revolution, that was with mechanical energies, and then with electricity. right, as we move through. But now with automation, we've been able to automate functions that used to be just in our minds, right? We've been able to create things in computing that were only ideas. What's even more interesting is the philosopher James Moore, back in, I think it was 1984, said that computing is the nearest thing to the universal tool. And the reason is that because a computer is really a giant decision-making machine, right? It's all about making decisions, lots of them very fast, is that we're able to, in essence, manage the three root causes of risk: the lack of information, the lack of control, and the lack of time, in ways that we've never been able to do before. So we're able to really not only make artifacts in ways that are staggering, but think the other thing that people forget about computing, and this is probably one of the most important things, is that how many decisions do we not have to make because of computing? And what I mean by that is that my grandfather was a master tool maker. Okay, he created tools to make tools. All right. So when you do that, you have to make prototypes. You have to physically make a prototype, right? And you have to test it out and you have to see if it works. And then you will make a machine. If it does work, you then make a machine to make that tool that can be used in other things. So again, you look at all the information that you're codifying in that. Now, one of the interesting things is that before computing, for the most part, you had to build prototypes, right? You had to build dies. You had to test things out. You had to put them in analyze. You had to, physically manipulate them. Well, with computing, you don't have to do that anymore, right? You don't have to design things physically to see whether or not they fit. You can use a computer to decide that, yeah, that pipe ain't going to go quite like that. It needs to be moved. So all these things. One of the levels of productivity that's not measured today, when people talked about, computing, the productivity was not increased by computing, is that I thought they measured the wrong thing. They didn't measure all the things that weren't done anymore because of computing, right? It's like the difference between, if I measure productivity in terms of manpower, yeah, I dig a ditch with 50 people, or I have a steam shovel with one person. If I measure manpower, I got only one person in the steam shovel, right? I didn't look at all the stuff that I've gotten rid of, all those other things. It's the same thing here. Computing has allowed us to not do things that we used to do, all right? And that's one of the dangers, right? One of the things we talked about earlier was what happens when computing gets to automate everything, right? Automates everybody's jobs, right? What happens then? That becomes another, that's kind of the downside of being able to, get rid of things, right? But at the same time, because we're able to get rid of things and we're able to do things that we couldn't do before, then, one of the benefits of computing is for instance, pollution. Cars, internal combustion engine cars, when I was a kid, having great big blue plumes of smoke, out of your 1956 Oldsmobile that you had, wasn't, thought of as particularly bad, right? Well, today, right, in the first minute of a car, that pollution is controlled because of all the computing, the algorithms that control airflow, timing, spark plugs, all that stuff to reduce pollution to virtually nothing in comparison to a 1956 Oldsmobile, right? So we've had tremendous benefits. Every industry has seen change that we haven't been able to do before because of computing. But as I said, the other aspect of that is that it also allows, bad things to happen. And part of that is the essence of computing, which is another element. Fred Brooks wrote this great paper right back, had to be in the 1980s. I can't remember the exact date. It may have been before that, but I think it was the 1980s, called, the no silver bullet, the essence in accidents in software engineering, which I think every computing person, anybody who's involved in computing, should read extremely closely, because it's still true today. He talked about 4 things in particular that made computing unique. And also, when the paper was about why it's so hard to create software systems. And the first one was complexity. There's a lot of complexity in a software, in a computing system, right? In the number of lines of code. Think about a modern vehicle today has 100 plus, microcomputers and anywhere from 100 to 300 million lines of code, right? That's a lot of complexity to have a car. And just in the engine alone, there's tens of millions of lines of code in modern engines to keep the pollution controls in place. So, the complexity of computing is and software is one of those things that really makes it hard to do, but also that complexity also makes it hard to understand when we go back, when we're talking about those AI systems. We also talk about conformity. Software and itself doesn't, there's no physical laws, there's no software physical law, right? In terms of physics, but software has to conform to specifications, right? You can't just write code. You have languages, you have definitions, you have interfaces, you have hardware that it has to run on. There's all these different levels of abstraction that need to interoperate together, and they have to be very specific for something to operate correctly. And one or two errors in the wrong place, and the whole system can collapse. This has happened many times in the past in major systems where a single line of code or two lines of code are bad, and a massive system goes out. So that's one thing. So you have to be, you don't have any laws of physics that you follow, but at the same time you have to follow conformity, these specifications at multiple levels of abstraction. The other aspect of software is how changeable it is, right? That's one of the incredibly powerful things about software, is that we can change it, right? If something is wrong, and if you can find out where it is wrong, you can go back and change it. Or if you want to modify it to improve it, it isn't, intensive. A single individual can make tremendous changes in a software program, right? We're not talking about, I don't know how many people it took to build the Transcontinental Railroad, but we're not talking about, masses and masses of people, tens of thousands of people putting out one program, right? We're talking about small teams can create something incredibly impressive. The other aspect of computing that and software that Brooks talked about was its invisibility, which is that, we can't see it, right? We're talking, over this system, right? In this online system that we're using with Zoom. And there's a tremendous amount of software that's operating in the background. We don't see it. I don't see it, right? But we know it's there. We know it's happening. It's in our browser. It's in our systems, in our cameras. It's everywhere. All the applications that are running, which are probably dozens, if not hundreds, actually, to make all this thing work. And we don't have any idea of what it does, right? So it's invisible. And even, if you ask somebody even at Zoom to say, can you track all the software assets that are being used, all the applications in Zoom at any one particular point in time, when two people like you and I are talking, I doubt they could tell you, right? It's invisible even to them, right? So no one really has a firm view of it's the proverbial 12 blind men and an elephant, except the elephant's about 5 million miles wide and 5 million miles high. So with that invisibility, and that complexity and that conformance and that changeability also creates not only all the benefits that software has and also makes it hard, but also makes it dangerous, because we don't know what's going on. We don't know how it's changed. We can't see everything. There's been many occasions where that invisibility has hurt people. For a long time, and in certain countries it's still true, banks would go and take a look and stack your deposits and withdrawals in your bank account in a way to maximize the probability that you would be overdrawn, so they could hit you with a fee. Okay, some states have outlawed that. I'm not sure it's outlawed in every state, but that's something that you didn't know that they were doing, right? And it also shows how it's easy to abuse the system. Anyway,
we want to be positive. We want to be
no,
we want to be positive now. This is your chance to be positive. We're slipping back into the dystopianism.
No. I think again the benefits. Look, the benefits. We couldn't have this conversation without software, right? We couldn't, have instant communications without software. We couldn't have modern society, wouldn't exist without software. And there were certain, maybe great days of living when I was a kid in the early 1960s, but believe me, I wouldn't want to go back there, right? I like my personal computer. I like going on the web. I like being able to surf the web. I like being able to, talk to my kids on the phone or text them whenever I want. I'd like, the fact that I have a car that doesn't pollute. I like the fact that, we can, start moving off fossil fuels more than we've been able to in the past. I like the fact that, I can order a pizza online and get it, within 3 minutes of me, getting there. I like all those benefits, right? In terms of, visibility into things that I didn't have before, just in terms of research. Me, I have a library here without exaggeration that has, probably in the neighborhood of about 8,000 to 10,000 books in my home. And yet, that isn't necessary. When I first started in the business, it was necessary, right? To collect, because my work is to understand all these interconnections of technology and society and politics and everything else. So I have a big shelves full of risk books and economics and history and, politics, you name it, I have it in my library. But, it's all online, most of it. Although there is one benefit, is that I have a lot of things that are no longer online. That's the one thing I think historians are probably going to be really irritated about, is that a lot of things that are only online are disappearing, and that there will be big, for a society that has published more information almost every day than has ever occurred in the previous 2,000 years. How much of it is going to be missing 10, 20 years from now, and maybe forever, because things are impermanent. But again, I think technology is great, but I'm also, as I said, I'm a cynical optimist, right? This is all great, but it could be greater, right? That's the thing. We don't need to have $2.8 trillion of poor software. We don't need to have project failures. We don't need to be, persecuting people over fraud that they didn't commit because of computer systems, right? We know how to do things better. But what really gets me irritated is that we don't do things better because, for whatever reasons, politics, laziness, stubbornness, arrogance, things that, may be part of the human condition. But again, it doesn't say that we should accept them either.
I want to end this discussion on a positive note. So, is there anything?
I've been positive.
No. I know you've been positive. I said I want to make sure that we end it on a positive note. And so I'm wondering if you could, to close, if you could give us any advice about, or give your audience any advice about how we can sort of maximize the positive, minimize the negative, in terms of better managing these risks as we go into this era of digital transformation, how to be more cognizant of it, and how we can sort of hopefully optimize the risk, this equation, so that we get more good outcomes and less bad outcomes as we move into the next 5 to 10 years.
I have a couple max, and me, I have.
I know, that's why I asked the question, because
a lot of
there's a long list. There's a long list,
but I won't.
Charette maxims.
We'll be here for another 3 hours.
Right.
I think one of the things. The first off is to master the detail, to master the risk. Right. We really need to master what it is that we want these computing systems to do. We need to think about not only all the benefits, but we need to think about the downsides, and then to balance those risks and rewards, and make sure that we're very transparent about it. Right. If we don't ask about the risk, we're not going to ever hear about them. And so, we only profit. Profit comes from managing risk. Right. All exchanges of goods and services, an exchange of risk and opportunity between the people. We've had this discussion many times before, and people don't quite understand that. All right. If I have a water leak, if one of my pipes is leaking in my house, I call a plumber. Right. Now, I don't have to. I could buy all the plumbing tools. I could go to plumbing school, apprentice, so I could fix my leak. Well, it's a lot easier to call a plumber. Now, that plumber has taken the risk, right, of doing all that with the hope that somebody has a leak that they're going to be called to go fix it. So to him, to that plumber or her, they look at me as an opportunity. All right. I look at them as my problem solver, my risk solver, because they're going to come here and do that. So, risk, where profit comes from, and this is, again, a basis of economics, you don't have profit without risk, right? You sell things to people because you manage their risk. That's why they buy from you. If you're the best risk manager of your customer, you're going to be king of the hill. That is just, there's no doubt about it. We can call them problems, which are just risks that have occurred, but you're still, that's where profit comes from. So the more we're able to manage the risk, more we understand risk, the richer we're going to get, by the way. Okay, that is just a given, which for whatever reason people don't seem to understand. They what bothers me, I'm going to be negative for one sec, is that in government people say they're risk averse because they don't want to identify the risk. They want to tell people about the risk. Well, my way of thinking, they're incredibly risk taking because what they're doing is they're almost guaranteeing that they're going to have failures. Where, if you really want to get ahead of the game, you look at risks very coldly. Tim Lister, used to say that risk management was for adults, and that's what it is. You look at it, with what my old math professor in high school would say, a jaundiced eye. You'd really carefully look at it and figure out how you're going to solve that so you can move on. And computing as a whole, the industry as a whole has taken that, right? We continue to manage risk. We bring out new things that hopefully manage risk. The downside is that we've also created other risks in doing that, right? Which we need to be a little bit more open about. Let's understand both sides of the equation. The other thing is that assumptions made are risks taken, right? As I said before, assumptions really underpin most failures. The failure to really understand them, to even reflect on them. And so we need to do that better. Another one is that if you can't reverse a decision, you can't manage risk, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I have more information, I need to revisit this before I move on. We could devolve into politics, which I don't want to do, but there's this idea that it comes from, I forget who said it, but I saw it in a John Wayne movie. Never apologize. It's a sign of weakness. And part of that apology aspect is that you can't reverse a decision, right? Well, yeah, you can, right? That's the only way you get ahead. And if you don't reverse your decision, guess what? You're not going to earn any profit. You're going to earn a hell of a lot of loss. The last one I'm going to leave people with really is that risk management isn't about future decisions. It's about the future of present decisions, right? It's what we do now, right? We can change the world if we work on the decisions that we're making now, right? There's been a lot of bad things that have happened. Let's learn from those and let's look and say, how do we move forward, right? And if there's one fault of the IT industry, and it's not just the IT industry, but the IT industry in particular has this, is that we fail to learn from our experience, right? We need to learn from experience. I don't understand it, to be honest. I've been in this business for almost 5 decades now, and I see the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I am flabbergasted that we don't have, we continue to make those same mistakes. Okay, it's really needless, it's costly, it's frankly stupid. And it made me a lot of money over a long time. But it really gets to be a little disheartening when you go in and you say, yeah, I've seen this, this before, right? There's nothing new here. So anyway, manage your risk ecology, make a lot of money, because if you can manage that ecology, especially as computing now becomes more complicated, there's a lot more opportunity to actually make sure that those risks are managed. And if you can, look at those edge cases, look at where the interfaces are, because that's where the risks are. The next billionaires will I'll guarantee you, the next billionaires will be the ones who manage all these interfaces and manage those risks.
Solid advice. Managing IT risk for fun and profit. Dr. Robert Charette, always a pleasure to talk to you. For those of you who want to read more about Dr. Charette, you can Google him, Robert N. Charette. You can go to IEEE Spectrum. He's got a lot of articles out there. They're excellent. I always learn something about the world that I'm living in when I read one of Dr. Charette's articles. Bob, so great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for all of your time. Hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you, Michael, and it's been a pleasure.